Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Get everything set up here. All right. So below. And can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Close that. Close that. Okay. All right. Let's see who's here. Got 22 participants. Let's give just a few more minutes. Meanwhile, we can take a look at the syllabus and see where we are. All right, let's see. Yeah, let's see. So we're getting started on week 3, where we're going to be talking about styling the web pages that we have created so far. Also, we'll create a couple more pages, and learn how to add some interesting formatting to the content we've created so far. At this point, you should have a working environment, right, where you have I'm installed Node.js, you've created a Hello World React application, and you've even deployed it to Netlify. And that was the first assignment, right? Get you up to speed with a working local development environment that you can share the source code on GitHub and then deploy it to a remote server for hosting so you can share with everyone else. And that was due yesterday, right, at midnight. And looks like, yeah, most people had submitted this way before the deadline, which is great. We just had a few folks that we had to help out, but looks like everybody was able to make it to the end. So it looks like everybody had already started with assignment 2, which is great, which is for the HTML material that we're learning how to declare the content that we are providing inside of these HTML documents, that we can structure the document and specify the different types of information, whether these are headings or paragraphs or lists or tables. And so we covered some of the more common, the most basic formatting elements. Give a chance to talk about how to, what is the relationship between them. That it was we introduced the DOM as a data structure for that browsers use to represent the user interface that they're rendering, and also we talked about how to configure elements using attributes, opening and closing tags, forms, how to navigate between pages. So some of the most basic skills that you need with HTML for creating web applications. So that was last week, and so there's an assignment for that is due at the end of this month, right? So you still have about a week to go on that, to complete that. So yeah, and it looks like most everybody has already submitted that, which is great. Everybody looks like you're really on top of this. That's great. So please keep it up. The course does pick up the pace as we get into programming and JavaScript and React.js. So definitely make sure to keep up the pace. So today we're gonna take a look at how we can override the default look and feel of these pages, right? As the pages that we've created so far, are using the default styling that browsers provide, which is just Times New Roman as a font, right? And the foreground color is just black on a white background. And so it's using a default formatting, a default styling of what colors to use, what borders, margins, padding, and so on and so forth for all the elements. So today we're going to learn how to override that so that you can make it look much more presentable, much more interesting, more catchy, more finished product. So for that, we're going to learn how to use CSS to do that. So we'll learn the mechanics, the syntax, how is formatting applied to the DOM. As we'll quickly learn, it's not trivial to make things look professional and finished and polished. So that's not the point of the of today's of this week's effort. We're not going to learn how to make things pretty. For that, you need to. It's a completely different set of skills. It's a different. You need to have an artistic eye for that, right? But we are going to learn how you do it, right? What the syntax is, what the mechanics are. So that's why next week we'll make use of a library called Bootstrap that compiles pre-made formats that you just need to apply the certain CSS classes to make your content look presentable, right? These are created by professionals that know how to make things look pretty. You just need to understand how CSS works, right, to be able to use this, right? So today, we'll learn the mechanics of adding and subtracting, and dividing and multiplying, and some of the basic stuff. And then next week we'll say, well, here's the calculator. Go ahead and just use this instead. But first, you need to know what the basics are. Yeah. So for the assignment, please use Bootstrap as a styling library. There's many other libraries out there. One of the most popular out there right now is Tailwind, and certainly I encourage you to use Tailwind for your project. Right, it's a great library to learn. But for the assignment, please stick with Bootstrap. And then the week after that, we'll start coding. We'll use JavaScript as a programming language to control the browser and generate dynamic content. So up to this point, right, the content that we're generating is all static, right? I mean, other than being able to navigate from one screen to the next, right, clicking a hyperlink and then navigating to another HTML document, and other than perhaps content adapting to the width of the screen, right, expanding or contracting or collapsing. Other than that, the content is static, right? So we are not adding any logic, any control, any functional programming or anything like that. Not yet, until we get to JavaScript. Okay. So anyway, so that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. We will have the first quiz next week, right? The Q1. So yeah, that will be probably the first 10-20 minutes of class, and or maybe first 10-20 minutes of the second half of the class. That will be, and that will be probably the same for the next several weeks. Okay. All right, yeah. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. Any questions? No chat. No. All right. Okay. Yeah. So let's see where we left off last week with we had created a React.js project. I've so far added links to the index page of our public directory, right? And let me share that with you. And I believe it's let me run that here. Let's run it here. And there it is. So this is what you should see in your local, right? If you clone down my repository, this is what you should see. If you click on a main branch, this links into the production, deployed to the production environment. If you go there, this is hosted on Netlify and has access to the A2 on the A2 branch. It will have the CSS assignment here, and then Bootstrap as well. So you can add links for the TAs to come to your public landing page, right? And they should be able to navigate to all the different assignments. There's also the Canvas portion that we worked on at the end last lecture, right? We get started trying to clone the Canvas website, which is this one, which is where a couple of columns represented here using a table. We said that was not the appropriate way of doing it, but nevertheless, that's what we did. Twitter, we just put a placeholder there. So anyway, so this is as far as we got last time. So today, we're going to learn about styling a few things, right? So for instance, in Canvas, maybe we can style this a little bit so that it looks more like the finished product. And styling maybe the syllabus, right? The syllabus that this is a whole bunch of paragraphs that we can show how to style these things, right? So we'll learn today on how to use CSS to style our content, right? So to do that, let me present the assignment that you'll be using to learn the skills. I just want to make sure that I cover this so you can get started. And also we'll use it as a means of introducing the material. We'll work through some of the exercises and start learning some of those skills, and then perhaps apply them to either Twitter or Twitter and Canvas. Okay. So anyway, so this is the assignment. As all assignments, there are 3 parts to the assignment. The first part of the assignment is the labs that walk you through several exercises with the intention of you learning the particular topic of that week. So this week, all the exercises are about CSS, learning about CSS, right? You learn some of the basic concepts of CSS, some of the basic skills of CSS. So the second part, Twitter, will ask you, so all that you've learned from those exercises, go ahead and use that to implement the following web pages, right? So whereas in the previous section, we kind of handhold you throughout the entire all the exercises. In the Twitter section, we only give you the what it's supposed to look like, right? And then some requirements on what it's supposed to look like and how to behave, and then you just have to make sure that it looks like that. Now the actual content, right? The actual image, the actual title, the actual text, right? You're free to change that. Okay, the actual content. So feel free to look for content of your interest that you might want to use. The tabs, right? The tabs do need to look like that, just so that we have a minimal set of things that we can check to see that you've done it. Obviously, the placeholder needs to be that. The actual icon you use for the cog here and and the magnifying glass, right? The actual icon, you can choose, one that suits you, right? If you find some other icon that is not exactly this one, that's totally fine. You can use your own imagery. Okay, same thing for these images or the icon over here. Instead of the New York Times, you want to use Reuters or some other news organization, feel free to use that instead. So you're asked to create an Explorer screen, right? And also create the bookmark screen. Okay, so you're asked to create a couple of screens, the Explorer screen, and the bookmark screen. Sorry, bookmark screen. Okay. Then right, that's for 100 points, right? The labs is worth 50 points. The tweeted is worth 50 points. And then the challenge, okay, this is only for graduate students, right? I don't cover this at all in the undergrad sections. You're asked to play around with some additional topics, right? Of learning how to do some more interesting transformations to the content, where you can rotate things, scale, right, translate, and do some sophisticated things with just rotating paragraphs or rotating lists or rotating entire tables or line items or images. Okay, so you're asked to do that and play around with those kinds of exercises. Then you're asked to play around with styling gradient colors, right, that start off with a particular color and end with another. Feel free to use a different color, right, if you want. Also, feel free to use different text or different values or different colors. That's fine, right? We're just asking you to demonstrate, right, that you understand how to rotate content, color gradients, radio gradients, and also then we ask you to play around with animations, where you can have content that that follows a script of animation, where things might grow, might shrink, right? It might rotate as they move from one part of the screen to another screen, right? So we give you a very simple animation here, and for instance, give you an example. We have this content, this paragraph, this div, right? Move, I think, from the right hand side to the left side, right? And it grows and shrinks as it navigates from left to right. And then the last part, you're asked to use Flex is it's a CSS styling that allows you to organize content either vertically, horizontally into columns, and have them align in different axes, right, and justified or center. So yeah, it's a nice technique, for laying out content, right? And finally, media queries is a basis of a topic that we're going to be introducing today, which is adaptive or responsive design, right? Where you have content, right, that responds or behaves differently depending on the size of the screen. For instance, if you have here the screen for Canvas, right? Canvas is a responsive website in the sense that that the for large screens, or for desktop screens, the content renders, for instance, these 4 columns. But as the screen becomes smaller, because you are watching the same content maybe on a tablet, right, or maybe on a phone, right, the web page needs to adapt, right, to the new size of the screen. So for instance, if I make this smaller and smaller, this last column doesn't fit anymore, right? And so it sacrifices itself and then goes away to give space for the more important portion of the content, which is this center, this middle column. And so it's true, if I keep going smaller and smaller and smaller, then we might get a collapsed version of these sidebars here on the left, right? Notice that that goes away. Notice that if I make it smaller or bigger, these two columns again hide themselves under this sandwich or hamburger icon. There it is. So they can bring them back by clicking over here, right? And then it expands out so that you can navigate across multiple sections, right? So that's what we're gonna be learning this week and next week. So using media queries allow you to define different different sizes of the screen and then choose how to style content based on that, right? That I want to hide this or show that or change the size of fonts and whatnot. Okay, so yeah, so that's that is the assignment. Now do you please keep working so that every assignment is in its own branch. So in this case, you're asked to please use the branch A3 and make sure that you deploy you commit all your content to the branch A3, right? And then you push that to GitHub, and then that will deploy in its A3 branch on Netlify, right? Now you should to keep all the work that you've done so far so that it's incremental, and then you bring forward everything you did on A2. You can do two things. You can create an A3 branch off of the A2 branch, right? So you first git checkout A2, right? So you're in the A2 branch, and then from there you can create a branch off of that, doing git checkout -b A3, right? Or even better, you can merge the A2 branch. You can merge it into your production branch, or your main branch, or your master branch. Okay, so that production branch always has the very latest of whatever you've completed, right? And then you can move on to the next task, right? So if you go that route, right, you would first merge into the production branch, either main or master, and then from there you can create the A3 branch, right? And then continue working. Once you're done with A3, right, and you're ready to move on to A4, you merge A3 back to main, and then you check, and then you create A4 out of that. You work on A4. When you're done with A4, you merge it back into main, right? And then you check out, create a branch A5 off of that, and so on and so forth. Okay, so either way works. Whatever you feel more comfortable with, depending on your level of sophistication with GitHub. Okay. All right. Any questions on CSS on this assignment? All right. Yeah. Let's keep going. So let's take a look at the slides. I mostly use the slides as a mechanism for making sure that I cover all the material. I tend to prefer looking at source code and doing some live coding, so we can see the the code that we have here on the slides. We can see a live reflection of what it is that we're doing. So let's see. So let's first talk about what is CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, right? And you know that I'm big on acronyms, so you can be sure that there will be an acronym question on the quiz or later midterm, of what CSS stands for. So it stands for Cascading Style Sheets, right? And basically, Cascading Style Sheets is a mechanism, or it's an entire new programming language, right? That is going to allow us to override the default look and feel of our pages. Right now, Our pages are using the default style that comes out of the box from our browsers, and it's pretty lame, right? It's pretty ugly. So CSS is a language that allows you to say, hey, you see that node over there or that element in the DOM? Well, I know that the default is black and white, but I want to override that and say that I want it, the foreground to be yellow and then the background to be red. Okay, and so there's two things there, right? Two fundamental skills that we need to master. So one of them is what is the language or syntax to be able to refer to the element in question, right? Saying that paragraph over there, or that heading, or that div, or that list, or that table, or that row, or that cell, right? So how do you refer to different portions of the DOM elements, right? So that in itself is non-trivial. Okay, so it can get fairly hard to do that. So the second part, right, the second skill that we need to learn is that once we have identified the elements in the DOM or on the screen that we want to configure, what is it that you can do with it? Right? What can you do with it? Right? Certainly, I'm sure you will be able to change the foreground color, the background color. You can change the fonts. You can change, the border around it. You can make the border thick or thin. You can position it anywhere on the screen, right? You can change its width, its height, the font size. You can make it big or small. So basically, you can change the entire look and feel of that particular element or elements. Okay. Now, the easiest way of styling something or changing the look and feel is to use the style attribute. Okay, so let me show you. Let's see. So, for instance, here we have the syllabus, right? And so this document is the syllabus.html. We can open it up. Let's put this on the right hand side, and let's bring up the IDE and put this on the left side. So if we open up the syllabus, so there's our syllabus. We could change the look and feel of this document, right? And we can see the effects here on that document. So, for instance, we could, this H2, this syllabus is this syllabus here, and this web development is that right here, right? And we can use the style attribute, right? We can say style, and the style allows you to write CSS properties here and their new values that override the default behavior, the default look and feel, right? So, for instance, notice that it gives you all the things that you can change. You can change the foreground color, you can change the background color. So let's start with that, all right? So, for instance, the background color, we can say, and then it gives you a couple options of values that you can write. It gives it to you in hexadecimal code, right, with the hash in front, or some well-known names for colors like blue, yellow, and whatnot, right? So, for instance, the background color, we can make it say blue, right? We can do that, and we save that, and then we refresh the screen here. Notice that indeed it didn't work. Wait, what? Let's see, where are we? Oh, I'm not in the locus. I'm not in the local. There we go. You go to Canvas. Okay, so I'm now in local. I'm local. So let's go to the syllabus. There we go. Okay, so now I'm looking at this local file. I was looking at the one that was deployed on Netlify. Obviously, I can't change that, right? I need to change it locally and then push the results to deployment file. Okay, so notice that I was able to change the background of this H2. See that? Not only can I change the background, I can also change the foreground, right? To say color, right? And maybe make it white. Okay, save that. And then I can refresh, and indeed now I have white on black on blue. Okay. So I can apply the same style to other elements. So I can say this paragraph, I can say the same thing. So style, I could say that the background color is red, right? And that the foreground color, right, is say yellow. Okay. And then I can refresh, and there's my paragraph, right? Now it's only this paragraph that changed the style, right? Because I only applied it to this one paragraph. Make sense? Okay. Now it's considered amongst developers, web developers, a bad practice, right, to change the style of an element right on the elements, right? It's so even though we can use it very easily, the style, this is a big no-no, right? You should not do this. Unless you're just playing around and you want to see real quick what the you want to prototype this, but you should not use this technique. Okay, and the reason is that typically you want consistency across websites, right? Your entire website, and so typically all your H2s would want to look the same, right? With the same foreground white and background blue. So if you're going to use the style attribute, well, you would have to copy and paste this content on every single H2 across an entire website. And and you could have several hundred web pages, and each one having several dozen H2s. So you're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of pieces of code that you need to repeat all this over and over. Okay. So that's not a good approach, right? And say tomorrow you want to modify the style for all your H2s or your paragraphs across your entire website, you would need to go and maintain and manipulate these things across the entire website. So that's going to be a pain to maintain. All right. Now, say I want to style all my H2s within a document. You might have a dozen, maybe a couple of dozen of H2s in the same document, right? And you want them all to look the same. You don't want to have to copy this over and over and over across all your H2s in the in this web page, right? So a slightly better way, right, is to have a single place where you create the style and then you apply it to all your H2s, right? So for instance, you could say, H2. Okay, the way you do this is that you would, instead of using the style attribute, right, you would use instead the style tag. See that? In the heading, in the head tag. So in the head tag, you want to be able to move this style right here, right? Foreground and background. You want to remove it from here and move it into a style. Now, the problem with this approach is that now, when this was applied to H2, it was clear that the style was being applied to that one element. Right? But now that I move it here, it's not clear what does this belong to? Does it belong to H2? Does it belong to the paragraph? Who does it belong to? What do I want to paint as white over blue? Right? So to do that, we could use a selector, right? Selector that says that H2, right? And you can put this in curly brackets. Right, you're saying that H2 should have this style, right? You're saying, hey, that H2 element over there, right, should have that style. Okay, and let's change that. So this is on the left. On this H2 is referred to as the selector. Selector meaning selects elements in the DOM, right? Remember that all these H1s, H2s, these paragraphs, they end up being nodes in a tree structure called the DOM. right? So H2 selects the H2 element, right, and changes it to white over blue. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh this and notice that it doesn't change. Just to make sure that the change did take, let's make this purple. And then refresh this and notice that indeed, yeah, we have white on purple. Everybody good? So let's do the same thing for this paragraph, right? Let's remove this from here. And let's remove that. And the style from the paragraph, I'm going to say, we're going to apply the same idea here, right? Say paragraph P. Right, so this is the selector on the left side. Okay, we call this a CSS rule, right? This is an entire brand new language, right? So this is the HTML language that we introduced last week, and today we're introducing another language, the CSS language. Okay, and the language is written in terms of CSS rules, and the rules have two parts, right? We call this the left side of the rule, and there's the right hand side of the rule. Okay, so the left hand side of the rule is a selector, is how you tell the browser which elements in the DOM, okay, are going to be configured. Okay, so that's the left hand side, and we'll see in a minute, right, how this works, right? The selector. Up to this point, we're selecting it by the element name, right? The element's name is P, paragraph, and then on the right side is the properties that we can tweak, right? What can we change? We can change the background color, the foreground color, the font size, all sorts of things. Okay, so let's save that. And so if I run this and I refresh, notice that now all my paragraphs are yellow on red. Okay, how the rules work is that it will fire that rule is pattern matched with all the elements on the DOM. So whenever the element matches the rule, right? Whenever an element in the DOM, okay, P, matches the rule, then it applies the transformations. Okay, and in this case, there are two paragraphs that we are styling. Everybody good? Okay, so well, what if I want to be a little more specific, right? What we could do is give a paragraph its own unique identifier. For instance, we could say that, you know, this is the goals, right? The course goals. So we can give them maybe ID goals. Okay. So then from the rule, I could say, well, this rule only applies to a paragraph whose ID, right? So hash in the CSS language means that I am referring to the ID of some elements. Okay. So there's hash, and then notice my IDE already has detected all the IDs in this page, right? And so it's giving me an option of which one I want to choose. So yes, goals. So I'm saying the paragraphs whose ID is goals, I want to change the foreground yellow and background red. So save that and let's refresh. So there it is, right? So now it's applying onto that. Just to make sure that this is indeed working, let's change the background maybe to green. And let's refresh, and there's green. Okay, so it is working. So these values, these names are well-known names by the CSS engine in the browser, but you can instead use hexadecimal codes, right? Notice that the browser gives you a selector where you can choose a hexadecimal code of the color, and it writes it for you right there. That's the hex for that particular green. But you can change it, right? There it is, and it gives you the hash version of that color. See that? And refresh, then it becomes this dark navy blue. Everybody good? All right, so yeah, so we've seen how to change styles using the style attribute, and we said no, don't use that. and instead we moved it over to style. Okay, and it's a little better. I mean, we saw that that we could style all the paragraphs one way, and so it mentioned what's more convenient because you can put one rule in the style tag, right, that applies to all the elements in the page. And so instead of having to copy paste that over and over and over, right, I can just create a rule for all of them right here in the style. So that's better, but it's still considered bad practice, right? So the best practice is to not have the CSS here at all. Instead, move it into a separate document, into a style sheet document, CSS document, right? And then load it from the HTML document. So let's do that. So these styles right now are specific to the syllabus screen, right? So what we're going to do, so it's a good practice to declare for each, for each screen that might have very peculiar styles for that particular screen, right? It's a good practice to create a dedicated style sheet document for that screen, right? So we have syllabus HTML, so we'll create syllabus CSS. There it is, syllabus CSS, right? So in here now, we can move all these styles. I'm going to copy them out of here, remove them, and then just remove the style tag and move my code here. There it is. I just pasted it there. Now, unfortunately, if I refresh my screen, notice that it goes away. None of the styling is aware, right, of any of this. So for this to take effect, you do have to explicitly link these two documents and say that, hey, this HTML document is dependent on this other document, that CSS file. And the way we do that is with the link tag. So link, and so the link tag has two attributes that we want to configure. So the first one is tell it where could it find the document that I want to link, right? And you do that with href. Say href. There's my IDE already parses the content of this directory, sees that there's a CSS file. So I'm going to select that. So yeah, so we need to point to the CSS file, and also I need to tell it what is this, how it should interpret this document. What is it? What does it do? So there's quite a few types of things. So here we can, okay, there's a question on the chat. Let's see. What's the hierarchy of the style tags? For example, if we have blah blah and p, which one will be applied? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. Yeah, great question, Yuan. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, so the link, first it declares what the file that I'm linking is. So here's syllabus.css, but also how it should be interpreted, right? What is the relationship of this document with the current document? So you can specify the REL, the relationship of what is it? Is it a script? Is it a style sheet? It's a style sheet, right? So let's select style sheet. So this is how it should interpret, so that if I refresh this, notice that the style comes back. Make sense? All right. Okay, so let's see. So yeah, so there was a question that Yuan was making, that what happens if two rules, right, might collide, right? What happens if one rule applies to the paragraph and then another rule also applies to the same paragraph? Which one wins? Which one wins? So for instance, let's take a look. So here we could say here, right? So if I say paragraph, right, and I want this background to be this dark blue and this yellow, right? Notice that if I refresh, notice that it applies to both. See that? Now, if I say now p and say hash goals, right, and I make the background, oops, if I say the background color, and I say that this should be red, see that? So this paragraph applies to this specific paragraph here, right? This rule here only applies to this one paragraph, whereas this applies to all the paragraphs. Yes. So that means that both of them are trying to style this one paragraph, right? This one says that that all paragraphs should have this dark blue navy, but this one says that this specific paragraph should be red. Okay, so which one wins? Which one? The rules are colliding. The browser needs a mechanism to decide which one wins. Okay, so let's refresh. Let's see what the browser does. Okay, so let's refresh. So notice that this one won, right? And there are two reasons why it wins. Okay, one of them is because it was declared later, right? It was declared later, and it wants to override, right, anything that was declared before. But most importantly, okay, it is a rule that is more specific, right? So this rule is very generic and it applies to a wide number of elements. But this one is very specific. It says, no, this rule applies to only a single element, right? So the browser gives more weight, right, to rules that are more specific, right? So this rule certainly is more specific. Notice that the order should not matter. So if I declare it above it, right, and I refresh it, notice that it still applies. Okay. All right. And also notice that if I declare another paragraph, another rule here that applies to all the paragraphs, and I say that the background should actually be green. Okay, and I refresh this. Notice that this is now green, even though the one before said it should be dark blue. And the reason this wins because it was declared later, right? And it's overriding any prior rules, but not this one, because this one is using an ID and it has much more weight, right, than something that is declared later, right? So if I move this and I put it before it, right, and I refresh, notice that it becomes blue again. See that? So the order matters, right? So later rules override prior rules, right? But rules that are more specific override, anything else. Okay, makes sense? So there's actually a formula that is used to give weights to these different reasons why one would be taking over another. But I'm not gonna get into that. There's how close it is, how specific it is, right? Whether it was declared on the style, on the style tag, or in the link, right? So there's a formula that the browsers use to calculate and resolve inconsistencies, right? All right. Okay. Hope that that helps. All right. Yeah. So let's keep going. Now this style, this syllabus.css, as we mentioned earlier, this is presumably a CSS rule that applies to only this one file. Okay, the syllabus.html, right? So, and that's by convention, right? That's just because we said so, right? We put up that rule that right, if we want to style a specific HTML document, right, we would create a sister CSS file, right, with the same name but the CSS extension, and then link it from that HTML document, right? Now we might want to create styling that that we want to use across multiple pages, right? And for that, we want to declare a generic kind of like a global style sheet, right, that can be shared amongst multiple screens. So for instance, one common thing to do, right, that if we're styling the Canvas website, right, we might declare a separate file, a separate style sheet, and give it a generic name such as styles, right, and then include or link that HTML document, that CSS file, into all the other documents that we want to style and have a common look and feel, right? So for instance, in the certainly in the syllabus, we would declare, right, another link. We would declare a link saying that this is a style sheet, right, and that the HTML, the href is going to reference. I'm going to go up one. Oh, yeah, there's our style sheet. There it is, right? See that? And so in here, we might declare that, style sheet, we might declare that all H1s, right, should, this H1 should all be, much bigger. Maybe we can change the font size and say we want it 2 EM. So this is like twice the normal size, and say that we want the color to be cyan, right, and that the background color should be green, right? And so if I refresh, I notice that it's taking the style from this global style sheet, right, and then it's also taking styles from its specific CSS file. Notice that the order in which I have declared this, see that? I first declare the styles and the CSS first, and then the style that is specific to this file later. And the reason is that the ones that are specific to this file should be able to override, right, whatever global stylings there might be. So for instance, syllabus, I might say, well, no, I know that you globally said that you want this H1 to be cyan over green. I know you said that's true for all the websites, for the entire website, but I want to specifically, my syllabus needs to, right, instead have a background color to be blue, right? And so I want to be able to override whatever my global might have said, right? So if I refresh, notice that now it's overriding the green that is declared at the top level, right? And I am overriding that in this one that is local, that is specific to this one web page. Make sense? Right? Now this looks awful, horrible. But that's fine. I mean, that's not the intent of here. We're learning what the mechanics are, what the syntax is, and what the relationships are on how you declare things in what order and what is the effect. Okay. All right. So yeah. So we learned about being able to refer to elements by their name, by their IDs. Okay, and now let's learn yet another one. Now, before I continue, notice that this goals is using the ID. See that? And so that means that because it's an ID, there's only one paragraph that has that ID. Okay, which is the goals paragraph, which is this one right here. Okay, and so because, and there's no other paragraph that has that ID. It can't be, right? By definition, an ID is unique. So in this case, there's absolutely, when you're using an ID, there's really no need to combine it with the name of the elements, right? Because the ID is already unique, right? Already is referring to this specific element, regardless of whether it's a paragraph or an H1 or whatever, right? So if I save that and I refresh, notice that indeed it doesn't change. So if I change this to green, just to make sure, right, and I refresh, notice that it takes over, right, that green. Make sense? Okay. All right, so let's keep going. So we know how to reference DOM elements by their name, by their IDs, right? We can also specify classes. So classes, just like you can just like elements can have IDs, right? And say that the ID of this paragraph is goals, right? There are other attributes that allow you to reference this paragraph, right? Well, of course, you can reference it by its name. You can reference it by its unique ID, or right, you can say that this paragraph belongs to a certain category of elements that should be grouped together, and that together all these elements should have a particular look and feel. Okay, meaning that this particular element belongs to a class of elements or a category of elements, right? So, for instance, you might say, let's try with this div, right? We can say that this and this div is, I think it's this div here. Okay, we can say that this div belongs to the elements that have that all these elements have a background that is yellow. Okay, and in this category, you can give it whatever name you want. Okay, and so you can create the categories as you go. It's kind of like a tag, right? When you tag a topic, or when you tag a hyperlink or an article, right? And you create, or an email, right? You can tag it and say, okay, well, and then you can filter by that tag, right? You can say, oh, I want all the emails that have this particular tag. Yes. So same thing here. You can create the name of the tag, whatever you want it to be. So I am tagging this div with this class BG yellow, right? And so I can tag whatever I want to have background yellow. For instance, I can tag this course goal. I can say that I'm also going to tag it as having BG yellow. Okay. So now these two elements belong to the class or the category of elements whose background is yellow. Obviously, that doesn't do anything, right? If I refresh, it doesn't actually change anything because I haven't defined how is the background defined as yellow, right? So let's do that. So the way we do that is we can go, I guess, let's define this in the styles, right? Because this class maybe is useful not only in syllabus, but it's useful in other pages. So we can declare this. And notice that my browser, my IDE is smart enough and already picks up that class. So you see that dot? When you press dot, just like hash refers to the ID of the attribute of the element, dot refers to the class of the element, right? So it knows that I have tagged two elements with the class BG yellow, right? So when I press dot, it says, "Ooh, you want to define the class BG yellow, right? Let's define it." And so then here I can say, "Oh, well, it's the one whose background, right, is yellow," right? So I have given this transformation an abstract name, right? A reusable name that I can go on and apply it anywhere I want. So if I do that and save, right? If I refresh, notice that indeed, course goal becomes yellow, and this div also becomes yellow. See that? Right, and I can go anywhere I want to change to yellow, right? Maybe this last div, right? Class yellow. There it is, right? So if I refresh, notice that it becomes yellow. This as well. And this is applicable anywhere, even in my index page, right? If I go to my index page in my canvas, this one, I can load my style sheet here as well, right? I can link my style sheet. I can say link And then, this is a style sheet, and this is href styles, right? So I want to be able to use all the styles that are declared in this global style sheet. And so I can go back to my canvas, and anything I want to paint with a background of yellow, I can just apply that class. We can say class BG yellow, right? So if I refresh, notice that I painted that as yellow. Why is it cyan? Huh? BG yellow. Why are you cyan? Interesting. All right, I'll see that in a minute. But I can paint it. I can paint this this column here, right? I can say class. Oops. I can say class BG yellow, and refresh, and there it is. So I can have a background yellow. So anything that I want a background yellow, I can apply that. Okay, makes sense. I'm curious why this is cyan. Let's inspect. BG yellow. Oh, H1. Oh, I have declared all H1s to be cyan. Okay, good. Got scared. Yes, thank you. I hate computers. They always do exactly what they're told. Yes. Oh, I hate it. All right. So let's go back and let's play around some more. So in my style sheet, I can declare all sorts of useful classes. I can say, foreground color, purple, right? Purple. And then just say that this is color purple. Great movie. And so now I can go through my styles, right? And then I can combine these classes, right? I can say that this all lecture, right? And let's close this. Back in the syllabus, right? I can, this div down here. I can say that not only the background is yellow, but I can combine different classes and apply it to the same elements, right? So I can combine, background yellow with a foreground purple, right? And probably can't see it. Yeah, there's a purple there. Or I can declare different sizes of fonts. I can say, text large, large. Okay, and this would be maybe font size, twice as big. All right. So I can go and here I can apply that style and say that the text is large. And so I'm going to refresh, and now it's twice as big as it would normally be. All right, make sense? All right. So these oops. So these this technique of declaring these kind of like these reusable styles that I can then combine to make whatever I want, right? It's a very common technique that has become very, very popular lately. Let's see, is there a question in the chat? When to use EM, REM? Yeah, we'll talk about the differences between all these units, right? Of using pixels and whatnot. Yeah. So yeah, let me finish my thought. The declaring these utility classes, right, has become very, very popular. And for instance, in Tailwind is one of the more popular libraries out there of styling and HTML documents, and it basically it's a plethora. It declares a plethora of very useful classes that you can then go on and use and apply them to different content, right? And then now it does tend to create a very, very verbose class, right? Where you have 10, 20, 30 different classes applied to one element. So it becomes very verbose. So there's actually a kind of like not a controversy, but there's a debate in the development community on the wisdom of declaring so many little functional classes, right? Making a bloated code, right? So some might say that, hey, a better solution would be to declare more abstract or higher level classes, right, that might already combine certain things, right? So for instance, instead of having these individual classes, you might have something like highlighted text, right? And so this would mean that this the background is yellow. Let's use a different color, light green, okay, and then the color, right, make it blue, right, and maybe the font weight is maybe bold, okay. So now, right, you come up whatever it means to you that something is a highlighted text, whatever it means to you, right, and you create the style for it, and then you can go ahead and start using it and painting things so that this is a highlighted text. See that? Right? And then when you come back here, right, this highlighted text has that specific text associated with this div, right? So this um, alternate way of styling things, it makes the code less verbose, right? Maybe perhaps a little more readable, right? Doesn't make your code so much bloated, and perhaps still reusable, right? You can still go around and highlighting text wherever you want, right? I can go to my canvas index, right? And so this canvas, instead of making it BG yellow, I can say this highlighted text, right? And save that. And then it applies to this canvas. So I can start using it anywhere I want, right? And highlight that canvas. So yet another school of thought is that you would use, you would name all your things in your HTML. You would go around naming things, right? Very much like we did for the syllabus in this paragraph, right? So this paragraph, we called it the goals paragraph, right? And then you would go around giving names to things, right? You can say, this is the focus paragraph. So focus paragraph, right? And so you would go around giving names, and so this would be the ID, the syllabus, right? Syllabus heading, right? So we go around, so you get the ID. This is the web dev heading or something, right? So this is yet another strategy. And then in your CSS, you would define what those things should look like. You say, well, my focus ID, so this is focus paragraph, I want it to be, let's see, syllabus, what is my focus paragraph? What was it called? It's this one. What was the focus paragraph? Oh, it's this one, right? This one, which is which one is it? Focus. It's this one, right? The focus paragraph. I want it to be background light green, right, and color red or something, right? So I refresh and notice that it takes that styling, right? So those are three strategies. So one is you define a vocabulary of functional styles of classes that you then can combine to make more complex look and feel. The other one is a little bit higher level, where you come up with functional, more higher level functional that combines multiple styles, right? So that your classes don't become so verbose. And then finally, there's a naming where it's a semantical, right? You give meaning to each element, right? An actual role, right? And then you go on and style all those roles. So this was very popular at the beginning. Folks have been abandoning this strategy more towards the functional styles, right, where you have multiple classes and then you can combine them. But a happy medium is to come up with these reusable generic styles, like the highlighted text is not so low level. This one, the problem with this that I see of saying BG yellow is that actually gives away the fact that it's going to be yellow, right? For instance, a little more, a little better might be something like BG primary, right? Or BG secondary, where you give it you give them names, right? But you don't commit to an actual color, right? Or an actual style. It's more of a logical styling, right? That you can then come back later and change the actual font, the actual color, background, foreground, blah, 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 right? But you give it names, right? So you might say, instead of red, instead of saying BG red, right? You might do something danger, right? Or instead of BG green, right? You might say success, right? And then you would make those green or red or whatever. But then you can come back later and then change the style a little bit. Maybe make it more rosé instead of red, right? Instead of making it green, you could make it lime green, right? And then over time, your style could change, without making a dramatic need for refactoring. Make sense? Everybody good? All right, so let's keep going. So let me make sure that I covered everything here. Just don't want to miss. I don't want to miss this. Okay. So yeah. So let me close this. Cool. Okay. All right. So we talked about the using the style attribute, the style tag, right? Style tag. We talked about the using the link as being the best option. We talked about using the ID selectors, right? And using the class selectors, right? So again, the intent of this assignment is to learn about the different skills of the minimal syntax functionality that you need to know to style things or read CSS, right? Not going to ask you to try and make things look prettier with CSS. We're not artistic. We don't have that knack. We are developers, but at least you should know what the mechanisms are. We talked about foreground color and background color. We did that. All right. So the box model, very important. Very important. So the browser, whenever it sees any contents, right? So any rectangular area that you see here, right, is defined by what is called the box model, right? So for instance, if I inspect this this div or this paragraph, you'll notice that you see the DOM here. If you hover over that element, you'll see that it highlights it on the left side, right? And it puts some highlighting around it. See this salmon color that appears above and below, right? Notice that if I hover, see this salmon? That's salmon here. So that it comes from the box model, right? So notice if I scroll down, it renders several boxes inside of each other, right? So this is what it's referred to as the box model, right? So if I click on it, see the salmon color here, see that? It highlights it here as well. It says that there are 16 pixels above and below. There are 16 pixels above and 16 pixels below, right? And which is defining or configuring what it's called the margin. The margin. So the margin is the space above, is space between the content, this paragraph, right? This content and other content, right? So the other content is content that is, for instance, above or below, right? Or next to, okay? So here we're defining that we want a 16 pixel margin above and 16 pixel margin below, okay? And defined by the default, this is defined by the default user agent, okay? That that is defined, defining the default one scale of whatever the default pixels are, right? Which in this case is 16. This says it's just I want one of the normal size, right? Which you can then make it twice or 2 times or 3%, right? Or 100%, 200%, right? By changing the number. So we'll come back to that later, of being able to scale things and do some math on how to scale fonts and things like that. So for now, we're only just going to use an absolute pixel size. Okay, we'll come back to talking about relative sizes and that scale on each other, that multiply, are multipliers of a defined value a little later. First, let's just talk about pixels. So for instance, this paragraph as defined by the box model is saying that there are 16 pixels above and below, right? There are no pixels to the left or to the right, right? So the margin defines a space all around me, but here but by default it's only defining above and below me, no margins from the left or right. I could change that. I could say, well, no, I want some pixels here. I can say 12, and notice how now has added some space on the left side, right? Pushing me off of the edge of the screen, right? And I can increase this, with my arrow up, arrow down, right? I can increase it above and below. Notice that it's manipulating the DOM's element P right here by applying a style attribute right on the elements, as if I would have typed that. Okay. Same thing with the right. I can put some space here. I can say 30 pixels, right? And now we have some space off of the right hand side, right? And I can change each one individually. So I can, push off from the left, from the top, right? I can push off from the top. Okay. Makes sense. Now, obviously, none of this is permanent. If I refresh, all this goes away, right? It just goes back to its initial styling. All right. Everybody good? All right. So margin is space between me and everybody else. Border, I'm sorry, let's not talk about border just yet. Well, actually, yeah, no. To be able to understand padding, we'll need to understand border. So border is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a border that is drawn. It's a rectangular border that is drawn around the content, right? Which right now, notice that if I hover over it, nothing gets highlighted on the left because there is no border. Notice that it has nothing. There's dashes all around, and also padding is not defined either, right? So let's play around with borders. Okay? So for instance, now this tool I'm using here on the right hand side is called the inspector, and you should get into the habit of having the inspector open almost always, right? Because you are the developer, right? And you are interested in making sure that you are telling the browser how it should render the left-hand side, right? And you do that by manipulating the DOM, right? Either by typing a literal text, right, in the HTML document and the CSS, or programmatically using JavaScript and things like that. Okay. So this tool allows you to prototype and play around and try out different things. So for instance, this paragraph, right? We could play around with this paragraph. We could say, you can either manipulate the style attribute right on the paragraph. Either using the graphical box model here or typing directly here at the element.style, right? I could say I want to set the border, okay? And the border property, as the name suggests, it allows you to control the border. Now, notice that the border attribute has a lot of versions. See, border, if I just type border, there's a plethora of attributes or properties that start with border. There is the general border property, that kind of allows you to configure lots of things in one single line, or there's a whole bunch of other borders properties, right, that allow you to configure individual things, right? So, for instance, you can configure, for instance, the size or the width of the border, right? You can say I want it to be so many pixels wide, maybe 20 pixels wide, right? Now, notice that as I type here and edit here, notice that what the DOM is doing is that it's typing the attribute, style equal border width 20. See that? And I can also change notice that nothing, you can't see anything yet. Not until I have a border width, color, and style will it actually draw anything, right? So we'll do border width. I would say border color, right? And I'll say maybe blue. Okay. Notice that it added it as a part of the style attribute, and then the border style, right? That could be dash. Notice that now it edits it on the left hand side. See that? It's dash, dotted, double, groove, hidden, inset, none. I don't want any border. Outset, revert, right? Ridge, solid, or unset, right? So there it is. So we can give it ridged. And there it is, right? So we are added a ridged border. Now this obviously goes away if I refresh the screen. Now, if I wanted to make it permanent, right, I would need to copy this into my source code, right? I could, for instance, copy this and copy what I did here, copy, right? Now, if I refresh, all this goes away, obviously, but I have it in my copy stash, right? My cache. So I know it was this paragraph that I was editing. So I can go to this paragraphs, right? Class or ID. Where was it? I forget. I think it was in syllabus.css. It was goals. It was this one, right? Right now, it's only changing the background to green. That's all it's doing, right? So I can paste in here those styles that we played around in the inspector, right? If I save that and now I refresh, notice that now it's been made permanent. See that? It reads it in and it tells you from where it's reading it in, right? It says that I'm reading in from the syllabus CSS file on line 15. This is a great tool, for debugging and understanding what's going on, right? That all these other styles CSS from line 26 and line 22, right, are telling the browser how to render the screen, right? So definitely become familiar with this, right? Okay, so yeah, so this allows you to style allows you to style the content, right? So let's go here. Let's go back to this CSS file, and now we can side by side what's going on. So there's a border properties that allow you to individually specify the values of the properties. You can go more granular or more high level. For instance, you could say, you could say you could have declared a single border property and specify all this in a single line, right? So instead of writing this in 3 lines, right? Like we can comment this out. You can comment that out. To comment is slash and star, not slash slash. Right? You have to use slash star for every single line, unfortunately, right? well, I mean, you can comment multiple lines, but it's always /*, not //. So border, you could have said, well, no, I want it to be 30 pixels, blue, and dotted, right? Dotted. So you could specify all in one single line. So if I refresh, notice that now it's dotted all around. Makes sense? Okay. So yeah, so you can either go very granular, right, into each individual attribute, or be able to specify in one single line. Now, not only can you go granular, individual properties, but you can even go even further granular. You can say that I can specify each individual side independently. So for instance, this one, and even combine it. So for instance, I'm saying that all the borders, the top, the bottom, the right, the left, they all have 30 pixels blue dotted. But then I could say, border bottom, I can specify the border at the bottom. I can override that. I can override that. I can override it in a single line. In a single line, I can say that it's actually 40 pixels, right? It's red, okay, and it's ridged. Right? So I can refresh, and there it is. So the bottom is ridged, whereas all the other ones are dotted. See that? So I can specify all three things in one single line, or I can say, border, border top, say, or top, border top, right? Width. So I can be very granular about each line, right? But the top, you can say that the top is 20 pixels wide. The border top, color, right? And say that this is purple, right? And border top style, right? Now notice I don't have to specify all of them. I don't have to specify all of them. So what it does is that if you don't specify one of the attributes, it'll just take from whatever more general. So for instance, if I don't specify the style, it'll stay as dotted, right? As whatever the border set, right? Because that's kind of like a generic, all the borders are dotted, right? And then I can overwrite all the other ones as I go. So if I refresh here, notice that it's dotted, it's a little smaller, right? It's purple, but I haven't specified the style. So it takes the style of the more general border, right? Or I can override it if I want, right? I can say border top style, and I can say that I want it dashed, right? So I can refresh and say then it's not dashed. Make sense? Everybody good? All right, let's take a short break, 5-10 minutes, and then we'll continue. All right. All right, folks, I'll be right back. Hello, everyone. Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Go. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let's see. Right. So the intention of just showing you all these properties is only a sneak preview of just talking about the syntax and what are how it tends to be able to work at a very high level or a very granular level right? The different things that you can be manipulating. Of course, there's just a plethora of things that you can configure, right? And so I think you probably have just an entire semester just on CSS. So we're definitely not going to be entirely extensive on what you can do with CSS. We'll do enough to know how to use it and understand when we're reading CSS and how we can edit it and change it and debug it for our purposes. Okay. Let's see, chat. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's keep going. Let's see what else was here that we were discussing. And yeah, the box model. Okay, so we talked about the box model. We talked about the margin. We talked about the border, right? Let's keep looking at other things that you can configure. So we talked about the margin, right? Margin that just pushes out our distance from other elements, right? So for instance, we have you can specify the overall margin, right? That this specify for all sides. So if you say 30 pixel margin, and then it's it pushes off above 30 pixels from left, right, and the bottom as well. Okay. Or you can specify individual margins, right? Instead of specifying all for all of them, we could say that you want margin at the top, right? Individually set it to something else other than 30 pixels. So you can say that I want this to be 20 pixels, so a little less distance from above, right? So this just moves me closer to the top a little bit, right? Or maybe I want to be off from the left side even more, right? So maybe I want to be 50 pixels from the left, away from the left, right? So yeah, that is just pushing off from the left. So again, this is space, white space around me, from other elements. Now within the element, you can specify also white spaces. So for instance, you might not want this text to be, flush with the border, right? So for that, you can specify the padding. So padding, again, there's a version that allows you to specify the overall padding above, below, left, and right, right? That you can say, internally, I want a white space that I want 10 pixels all, inside the div, right? So for instance, that adds some spacing above, left, right, and below, all around. Or you might specify individual padding, right? That I want maybe more padding on the right side, right? I want 4 times as much padding on the right. Okay, and so specify, and so there's more white space on the right here. Okay. So yeah, so that's mostly what the box model allows you to do. The margin, the border, the padding, and also the size. Right, you can specify the size and position of where does this box appear, right? In places in the on the screen. Okay. So for that, I do want to cover that a bit, since it can get confusing. So let's I believe, yeah. So let me declare a couple of colors, because the exercises here all depend on some of these colors being defined, right? So let me just define these in my high level, top level style.css. Actually, we're going to do some labs, right? So let me actually do it here. So this labs, let me create, so this is a 3, right? And let's create index here. And create index for lab 3. And let's declare a styles. I'm going to declare here for all the libraries, all the assignments. And even I would actually declare it up here, so that it could be shared across not only Twitter, the assignments, some styles that might be very, very useful across, Canvas, Labs, and Twitter, right? So let me declare here styles up here. Let's use the styles. Okay, and I'm going to declare a couple of useful styles that can define foreground colors, so white, black, blue, red, green. And let me declare a couple of background colors. The assignment asks you to do this, right? So that we can quickly paint a few things on the screen, different colors, right? So these are several foreground colors, right? As black, white, blue, red, green, and then some background colors, same colors as well. All right. Okay, so now that we have that, let's include that or link it in our index, right? So that we're going to have a link here, and this is a style sheet, and the href is this style. I'm going to go up one, and then down to the style CSS. There we go. Okay. There we go. So yeah, I wanted to discuss this example right here. Where are we? Corners, dimensions, right? So let's declare here dimensions here in our index. Right, so there it is. Let's run this and see what it renders as. So I'm going to run this index. Now notice that let's put this on the right hand side and our code on the right so that we can see side by side what we're doing. So this is declaring 3 divs, right? Three divs here. This one is saying that this div is BG color yellow, BG color blue, and BG color red. See that? So yellow, blue, and red. And these are being picked up from the style sheet we just loaded, right? The styles.css. So BG color, notice I can click on it and it goes to the declaration saying that the background color is this kind of yellowish color. See that? So yeah, but what about these? This dimension portrait is not declared anywhere. Notice if I try to click it, right, it doesn't go anywhere, right? Because this is because these names, BG color, blah blah blah, are fairly generic names that could be useful across Canvas, Twitter, and across multiple assignments. I declared it in a kind of like global style sheet here, which we can be included in multiple pages. But these these classes here, dimension, portrait, landscape, and square, are very specific to this assignment, right? And the intent is to teach you how to, for instance, render things that are in portrait mode, landscape, or square. It's very specific to this assignment. So I'm going to declare these classes elsewhere. I'm going to declare them in a file, right, an index.css, which is specific to this assignment. So I'm going to say index.css. Okay. And so let me declare these classes, which we haven't declared. Let's see. Oops. Oops. There we go. And so, and they are declared right here: dimension, portrait, landscape, and square. Right. So let's copy those. Copy that, and I'm going to paste it right here. So what this is doing is that it's saying I'm declaring these 3 classes for portrait, landscape, and square, which are being used in these 3 divs, right? In these 3 divs, portrait, landscape, and square. And what do they declare? They declare that the width is 75 pixels, but the height is longer or bigger than the portrait. See that? Than the width. So it's higher, it's taller, than it's wider. That's why I called it, portrait. And landscape, I made the width, right, bigger than the height, right? That's why I called it landscape. And then square, I just made the width and the height the same. Right? So and they're being applied. I need to load that CSS that I just created. I'm gonna link it here. I'm just gonna copy this one, and I'm just gonna change this to be just the local index file. There it is. Notice that I put it afterwards, right? I loaded this first, and then I loaded my index.cs. Remember, that order matters, right? That this means that, hey, this one's going to be declared some global style sheet, some global style, but then I want to be able to override, right? If it's specific to me, to this lab, okay? I'm not going to override anything, but just you get into that habit that first you declare, you load link CSS files that are more generic, okay, more global stuff, right? And then you declare in the later lines, you declare style sheets that are more specific, more granular to your particular document. Yes. Anyway, so if we now refresh this, this should work. There it is. So this is rendering portrait, this renders in landscape and square. Make sense? Okay. One thing to point out here is that these divs, right, if they don't have these classes, right, if they don't have these classes, they just render with the default width and height. Okay, the default width of a div is the entire width of the containing elements, and the containing element is this generic div, which is inside this body, right? So this div also wants to be as wide as it can as its container. And its container is body. Body contains everything, right? Which is the entire width of the screen, right? That's why div is taking up the entire width, and that's why these guys are taking up the entire width, right? Because there's as wide as the body, right? Now when I put back these dimensions, right, I am overriding that. I'm overriding. So if I refresh, I'm setting the sizes somewhat different. Make sense? But also what I want to point out is that before, right, without these classes, they were taking up the entire width. So one might say, well, they stack up one on top of each other because the one above was taking up the entire width, and obviously it's not leaving any space for the one below to kind of follow it in line, right? But notice here that even though I made this yellow one, I made it thinner, and I have plenty space, right? I have plenty space for this landscape to kind of like bubble up and render horizontally. Notice that it didn't. It stayed below, right? It stayed stacked up vertically. Yes, and that's a peculiar feature of the div. The div, by default, right, always wants to break up the page vertically. Okay, even if there's horizontal space for it to kind of like move over and follow, right? Divs want to break it up vertically. Make sense? That's the block behavior. I want to be a block behavior. I want to add that vertical spacing. Everybody good? So yeah, so I did want to point that out. So because now we're going to talk about position, we're going to take over the behavior of where things fall on the page, right? So, close that. So one overarching principle that the browser uses when it renders things on the screen, one thing that it's really trying to do to make sure that things are not overlapping on top of each other. Okay, it calculates all the positions so that everything has its own line, everything is nicely, if it doesn't fit, it's just going to wrap, right? But it tries to avoid putting things on top of each other. Okay, but now we're going to take control over that behavior. We're going to take control over the position of things. We're going to try and override that default position of the elements, right? So when you take over that mechanism, you can cause things to overlap on top of each other, right? So you have to make sure that if there's an overlap, is because it was intentional, right? It's because you wanted to behave like that, not because you inadvertently made a mistake and things start to overlap and cover one another. Now you can't read things that are behind, or because you have stuff on top of it, right? So you have to be careful, right? So yeah, so let's take a look at a little bit of these exercises and start overriding these positions, right? So there are many ways of manipulating the position of elements. We're going to use the three most common ways, or I would say the most interesting ways. we're going to take a look at relative position. Oh wait, no, relative absolute. Sorry, absolute and static. So position property. With a position property, you can configure the behavior, and we're going to take at 3 types of position. Right. First, we'll look at relative, then absolute, and then static. So let's take a look at relative. So I'm just going to copy this example. Copy this, and I'm going to just paste it above the dimension. And I'm going to re-render this. I'm going to re-render this. There it is, relative. Okay. So right now it's rendering just like before. Right. There's nothing different. Let's take a look at the HTML. We have the class saying that the background color is yellow. This dimension is a portrait. So yeah, portrait. There's a text portrait. Now, notice that this is slightly different. The example before just had the text inside of a div. See that? Whereas this is putting it inside of a div inside of another div. Right? See the difference? Right. So it used to be that this portrait was just like that. Right, like that. But I am now putting the portrait inside of another div, and there's my portrait. Okay, that's the only difference. Now, notice that I'm giving this inner div, this class, which I haven't defined yet. But you can kind of guess what it's going to do by reading the name, right? We say I'm going to change the position to be relative. And I'm going to nudge this down and right. I'm going to nudge it down and right. So, and it's going to be relative to something, right? We haven't talked about just yet. So here's landscape. Landscape is using the same, background blue, foreground white, and dimension landscape. We saw that already what those do, right? The only thing difference here is that we're doing. This is recording, right? Yeah. The only new thing here is that we're saying the position relative. I'm going to position move this. I'm going to nudge it a little bit to up and right. And then finally here we have square. We're not going to do anything here. We're just going to leave it square and the color is red. Okay, so let's define these two new classes. And it's right here. So let's copy this. And I'm going to paste it in my CSS. I'll just paste it here. Okay, so what it's doing here. So position relative, right? It's just saying that the position is relative. Okay. Now position relative nudge up and right is not only saying that it's a relative, but it's also declaring bottom and left. Okay, so position, what position relative means is that I want to move this content up, down, left, right, okay, relative to the position where I would normally fall, where I would normally be. Okay, so just please put me first where the browser would normally draw me, and then from there, move me either to the left, to the right, from the bottom, from the top. Okay, so that's what position relative means. Now, bottom and left, there's 4 properties that I can change about position. I can change the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. Right. Now, top and bottom is you can fairly understand it, right? It says that I want to be so many pixels away from the top, or from the bottom, or from the left, or from the right. That's how you read it. So I want to be 30 pixels from my left. This doesn't mean that I am moving my element. I'm not moving it left 30 pixels. I'm saying that from the left border, I want to move away 30 pixels. So left 30 actually moves the element to the right. Okay, so be careful, right? So I think it's easier to understand with bottom and top, right? From the bottom, I want to move away 30 pixels, and from the top, right, I want to move away 20 pixels, right? So that's why I call this nudge up and right. So I'm gonna nudge it up and then right. So that's why, to move it right, I'm gonna move away from the left. See that? So I'm moving it 30 pixels from the left, which is gonna move it right. And to move it up, I'm gonna move away from the bottom 30 pixels, right? So I'm gonna put 30 pixels below me, and I'm gonna move up. See that? Now nudging down right is, wherever I fall, I want to move down. So that means from the top, I want to move down 20 pixels. And to move it right, to move it to the right, I want to move left, right? I want to say from the left, I want 20 pixels away. Anyway, fine. Let's see how this renders. So this is first where it wants to fall, right? Naturally. This is before we apply the position relative nudge, yada, 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 before we define it. Now, if I'm going to refresh it, it's going to apply those styles. So I'm going to do refresh. There it is. So notice that landscape moved up and right. See that? This blue one. And now notice that the yellow didn't actually move. What moved is what's inside the yellow. See that? Okay. Because I wanted to point out the fact that it was relative of where it would normally fall. Where did it normally fall? It falls here in the corner, portrait, right here. And so I'm nudging down and right. So down and then right, 20 pixels down and 20 pixels to the right. Okay, whereas the landscape, I'm nudging up and right. So it's nudging it up 30 pixels and then right from the left 30 pixels, right? And notice that I have caused an overlap. See that? I have inadvertently or deliberately, overlap landscape on top of portrait. Okay, everybody good? All right. I'm going to put it in that order. Any questions there? Yeah. All right. So let's take another example. So that was relative. That was position relative. Let's take a look at it at absolute. So by absolute, unlike relative, right? Absolute, it's relative, absolute, and static. The difference between the three types of positions is what is the reference by which you interpret these values, right? So relative, these values means, measure this from my normal position, right? That's what relative is. Absolute is measured not from wherever normally fall, but from wherever my parent is. Whoever my parent is, measure this from my parent. Okay. And then static is the overall window. Okay. So let's take a look at. So let's copy this HTML and let's paste it in the assignment. So I'm going to put it here under position. Paste it right here. So this is the same thing as before, right? We have I had a whole bunch of breaks. I needed some space. And so the absolute position, right? We're saying that position relative. Oh, okay. This is gonna cause some confusion. So I'm gonna remove that for now. Remove that for now. Just a second. I don't want to have some confusion here. So here I'm declaring 3 divs, right? The same 3 divs from before, right? The first one is background yellow, right? And this one is blue with a foreground white, and this one is red, right? And this one is portrait, this is landscape, and this is square, right? So let's render that. So it's the same 3 divs as before, okay? But I am adding these 3 new classes: position absolute 1010, 5050, and 12020. Okay. And let's look at the declarations of what they mean. So let's copy that. I'm going to paste it in my CSS. And I'm going to copy it here down low. So let's read it and try to understand what it is. Okay, so this one is saying that the position is absolute, and so they all say absolute, 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 and so that means that you should interpret this as measured from my nearest parent, my nearest parent, whatever the position is of my nearest parent. Okay, for which there is a position defined, for which there is a position defined. Okay, so that, and then measure 10, 10, right, from the top 10, and then from the left 10. So move me a little bit to the right, a little bit to the bottom, right? From wherever this 0, 0, there's a 0, 0 position, right? For, in this case, it would be the 0, 0 of the window, right, of the document, which falls in the top left corner over here. So it would be this top left corner over here. We're going to be moving down 10 and then over 10, right? So this yellow one. Then this one moves again from the top and the left, and from the top I'm going to move down 50 and then 50 over. And this again, I'm going to move from the left. I'm going to move 120, so quite a bit, right? And then down 20. Right. So these three are going to move, right? They're going to move from here. So let's refresh. Let's refresh, and there it is. See that? I have moved this over. So there's 10, 10. This portrait, right? This one is 50 down and then 50 left, and this one's 120 left, right, from the left, and then 20 down. See that? Causing an overlap, right? But the most curious thing here is notice what happens to the bottom. See that this kind of like moved up, right? See that? It moved up, and actually it moved up. Well, it's so down because we had all these breaks. Right? Notice if I remove these breaks, look what happens. If I remove all these breaks and I refresh, notice that kind of relative is actually kind of like below, right? It's underneath this landscape. What's going on here? And what happened here is that when we added these guys, when we added these, notice this. If I comment this out for a second, right? If I comment these out, meaning I don't have the absolute, look what happens, right? These divs are going to again stack up and then push down. Okay, so if I refresh, notice that they stack up and they push down relative. See that? Right. But if I bring back my my absolute, they're not going to stack up anymore, and they're not going to push down the relative anymore. See that? So relative now comes up. What's up with that? Right. And here, notice that in the when I use relative, okay, notice that landscape is still pushing the square down. Yeah, there's still, right, it moved up and to the right, but still square didn't move up, right? It's still where it would have fallen in any case, right? But these no longer are pushing down on their bottom, right? And the reason is that what absolute does is that it removes the elements, right, from the DOM. Well, they're in the DOM, obviously, but it removes them from the algorithm that computes the location or the dimensions or the positions of all the other elements. So they no longer have an effect over all their elements. They no longer push or pull any other elements, right? That's why that's why relative, this relative element over here is behaving as if those three landscape, square, and portrait, as if they don't even exist. Okay, right. So yeah, so that's very interesting, right? That happens. Okay, so notice also the fact that the square was drawn on top of the landscape, and the landscape was drawn on top of the portrait. Okay, and that is because the rendering engine, right, as it's reading this, it renders them in document order, right? So first it drew this yellow portrait, then it drew the blue landscape, and then it drew the red square. That's why they're drawn on top of each other, right? Because they were rendered in that order. Okay. So let's take a look at the last position, which often folks get all confused about, right? And it's the fixed position. Oh yeah, no. Let me finish. Let me finish this. So yeah, notice that it's being measured from the 0, 0 here in the document, right? This is the 0 top left corner. See that? But you can change where is this being measured from, right? By default, it measures from the top left corner of the document, right? But you can change where that position relative from its measured, right? By defining, whatever closest element has a relative position, right? So for instance, if I want to measure 0, 10, 10 instead of from this 0, 0 here in the top corner, I could measure it from my parent div. So my parent div is this one, right? My parent div is this one, and it falls, below my absolute position. So it's actually under there. You can't see it, but under the position here, here's my position. This position here that I can barely see, right? There's a div, and under there I have my children div, but these are being measured against the 0, 0 of the corner. But I can change it to be positive relative, position relative, okay? And this would cause to be now the new 0, 0. Now, wherever it falls, it would be the new 0, 0 from which all these are measured, right? So if I refresh, notice now this portrait, landscape, and square are being measured 10 down and 10 across from where this div is. See that? Okay, and that's why I had added a whole bunch of breaks here, right? Because to cause cause the white spacing below that we lost when we became absolute. Okay. All right. Now, one thing that we need to understand about how all these work, right, so that we can understand the next one, static, is that notice that everything moves with the scroll bar. See that if I scroll the document, they all move with the scroll, with the scroll, right? So there's a 0, 0 position right here, right, with the document, but that 0, 0 moves with the scroll, right? So that the 0, 0 is here, and then as I scroll up, that 0, 0 moves up, right? So that's the 0, 0 moving up or moving down as I scroll down. Make sense? Okay. Now static is chooses another 0, 0, not the document, right? It chooses the 0, 0 of the window, whatever the window is. And if the window's not moving, right? Like here, the window's not moving. The content is moving, scrolling up and down, but the window's not. The window is staying in the same place, right? So only if the window moves, then the static moves, right? Let me show you. So for instance, here's a static. This is static, right? And we can grab not static, I'm sorry, fixed, right? So let's paste it here. All right, so I just added some verbiage here so that just some content that we can scroll around. And then here's my fixed position that it's a square, it's blue, it's white, right? If I render this, it's just a regular div, right? It's below my text, right? But it's blue, it's square, it's foreground white, nothing peculiar about it. But I'm going to find its position as fixed. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm saying I'm going to change its position attribute to be fixed. And then I can still give it right, top, bottom, left, like whatever. And now from the right, I'm saying 0, meaning it's going to be flush with the right-hand side of the screen, right? So its right-hand side is going to be flush with the right-hand side of the screen. And then the bottom edge of the square, I want it to be 50%, right, at the 50% mark of the entire height of the screen, right? So let's copy that. and I'm going to bring it over to index, and I'm going to declare it down here. There it is. And now when I refresh, notice what happens. Okay, there it is. See that? The right-hand side is 0, right? It's stuck. It's flush with the right-hand side of the window, right? And the bottom edge, notice that it's 50% from the top and 50% from the bottom. See that? So that's 50. It's not centered, right? The box is not centered. The bottom is centered, right? The bottom of the box is centered. Okay. Also notice that it's not pushing down the heading, right? Because just like absolute, fixed removes the element from the calculation of the position of all the sibling elements, right? It has no effect on the position of other elements, right? Notice that it's overlapping the text, right? Also notice what happens. Check this out. I am scrolling. See that? I'm scrolling the content and the box is not moving. See that? The box doesn't move. Because its reference point is not the document. Its reference point is the window. Only if the window moves, right, then the fixed position moves along with the window. See that? Okay. So yeah, so its reference points is the overall window, and that's what fixed means. All right. Makes sense? All right, awesome. Okay, excellent. So yeah, so let's keep going. Another very important aspect of CSS is the capability or the desire to be able to render things in columns, right? Horizontally. And as we mentioned earlier, that in our building canvas, we had kind of cheated, right? To create these columns. To create these columns, we use tables, and we had mentioned the fact that it was a bad idea, that we should not be using tables for columns, right? Tables are meant for tabular data, not for laying out content like we did here. Okay. But we still want to be able to render things in columns, right? In kind of like a horizontal aspect ratio, right? But that's not supported by native HTML. So our only recourse was HTML tables, until now that we are going to learn how to do it using CSS properly. Okay. So to be able to do that, to be able to use CSS, we're going to be using a styling that is going to allow us to float elements. So the floating allows us to very quickly put elements so that they are either flush to the right-hand side or flush to the left-hand side. And the intent was that you could embed images in text and have it kind of like stuck to the right-hand side or left-hand side, and then the text would kind of like flow around the image. So for instance, so let me show you. So say here you have an image here, Starship static fire. So let's take an image here, and let's say it's this image, right? And you want to view the file and say it's this image. I copy that image. And say I want to embed this image in my document, right? So for instance, if I go to my syllabus, right, I'm going to use my syllabus because my syllabus has a lot of content. So I have the syllabus here, and let's look at the content for the syllabus here. There it is. And let's embed it maybe here in around the text somewhere, right? This one, all lectures. So let's see, where is that? So here's my syllabus, and here's my all lectures. And I'm just going to remove the styling of the large text. Okay. So I'm going to just refresh. There it is, right? So say I want to embed my image here. So let's say I can put the image here at the beginning, right? I can say image, right? And I can say source, and I can point to an image. So that's the image. Now that's going to take the default width and height of the image. So it's going to be fairly large, probably, right? So it's a huge image. Let's see. Let's refresh. There's our image, and it's way too big. Okay. So we could easily just make its width be maybe 100%. Right, so now it's just taking up the entire width of the screen, and it's also kind of responsive because as I make it smaller, the size of the image also becomes smaller, right? But let's make it a little smaller. We'll say maybe 20%. It's even smaller. There's our image. Now by default, notice that images behave inline, right? They just follow the flow of the content, right? So if I would have put, say, I break up the text here, right, and I put the image in between, okay, you'll notice that the image just flows with the content. See that? Okay. So one cool thing that typically you find in books and in publications is that you'll have some long text, yada yada yada, right? And then you'll have maybe an image off to the side or to the left, and you'll see me do that quite a bit in my in my rendering, where I would put maybe an image on the right hand side or something that would float to the left side or the right side, right? In my own labs or even the book. Uh, so to accomplish that, there is a style called float. Right, you can float the image to be on either side. Right, so let's do that. So let's declare a float right. Let's declare a float right. Let's make this bigger so we can read it better. So let's declare these float right and float left. So let's copy this and let's put it in our CSS. Here, right? Let's put it down below. And let's take a look at this. So float right. So float left and float right, right? Basically what it says is that take that element, typically it used to be mostly for images, right? And just throw it on the right-hand side, right? So that it's flush with the right-hand side or the left side, right? And then all the other content around it, have it just flow around it nicely, right? So that I could write long paragraphs, and then the image is just nicely, the text is nicely just flowing around that content, right? So let's try it out. Not sure why this is the height is 100. So let's go into the syllabus again, and let's apply that style to that image. So we can say class, and we're going to say float left, say float left, and let's see what happens to that. Let's go back here, and is it this one? I forget. No, not that one. It's it must be this one. No. Oh. Huh? No, I meant for this, and then that I want it to be on the right hand side. There we go. So here's our syllabus, and let's refresh. Float. Wait, float. Huh? What's going on here? Is it rendering it? Oh yeah, there it is. Float right. Float left. Huh? Why is it not my float left? Why are you not working? What's going on here? Where is my CSS? Float left, float right, and the image is width 20. let's see, width W20, say, and let's put the width over there. Let's not put it in here. Let's put width 20, and this is width 20%. There we go. Width 20. Let me spell it. Class. Why is it not taking it? What's going on here? Float left, blah, 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 blah. And it is being declared with 200 pixels, maybe? Say 200 pixels. Maybe that's a better name. And this would be 200 pixels. Why is it not taking it? With 200 pixels. Why are you not taking the width? Right, pixels. Huh? Yeah. Pixels. Class. Source. What is going on? Why are you ignoring my 200 pixels? Let's see. Image, yada, yada, yada. Oh, it's not being applied. Why are you not applying my class? This is defined here, and it's defined in an index.css, and index.css is not being loaded. Of course. Of course. Yeah, no. So yeah, these styles would need to be declared. Let's load that index.css. Now that index.css is where? It's in the lab 3. That's why it's in lab 3. Let's load that. So yeah, so let's load that. I'm going to load it here since it's a style that's being declared in an entirely different section. So this is a style sheet. And it's where it's in, let's go up 1, then labs, then A3, and then index.css. There we go. If I refresh here, if I refresh, okay, W pixels is now being applied. Good. All right, there we go. So we resized it. We resized it appropriately. And now let's start playing around with position. So I'm going to say float left. Okay. And so we can refresh. Well, here it makes no sense. I'm just going to put it maybe here. So left, refresh. Okay. So notice how it's now flush to the left side. And look at what the text happens. Look at what text is doing. It's kind of like flowing around the content, right? Notice if I remove the float, the text does not flow around it. See that? It just flows as an inline, right? One after another from left to right, from top to bottom. Okay. But when you add the float left, right, the intent is that it's stuck to the left side, and then the rest of the content just floats and just wraps around that content. See that? We can perhaps put some margins on the right hand side so that the content is not flush, but that's another thing. We can also float it to the right. Let's float it to the right. So as you would expect, right, it puts it on the right hand side, and then the whole content just flows around it, right? So let's. I want to show you what if you had several of these, right? So that's an interesting behavior. So let's make this let's not make the height 100. There we go. So let's make this a little bit smaller so that we can make several of these, right? So with 100 pixels. So let's make this 100 pixels. There they are. So it's 100 pixels. Now, what happens if you stack several images, one after the other, maybe 3? What happens? Look at that. They are stacked from the right, moving to the left, right? One after another. And then a light bulb came up and says, ooh, if I have several of these elements and now they're stacked horizontally, I could totally use this, right, to work in the fact that I could maybe put some vertical content, right? So especially, and maybe not even from the right, it might make sense to move this from the left, right? Because we tend, in the Western world, we tend to read from left to right, right? So if I refresh, I'm creating columns that start from the left and then horizontally spread over to the right. Right? So now these are behaving as they would be inline, right? As inline, and then the content just wraps around it. Make sense? So this idea, kind of like blows everybody's mind. Says, ooh, now I should be able to use this technique, right, to do my my canvas correctly, right? Instead of misusing tables, I could define several divs, right? And instead of just using images, I can use a div and then float these things so that they stack up, horizontally instead of vertically. I can change the behavior of the divs so that they stack up in one way or the other. Okay. So, for instance, let's try and rework this canvas so that it doesn't use tables wrong, right? It uses them properly. Don't use them for this, right? But instead, we use divs and floats. Right? So let's go back to the canvas index, right? Which is this one. Okay, what we want to be able to do is the following. We want to kind of be able to create tables with rows and columns, but without actually using tables, right? Using divs. Right? We want to be able to do something like this. So you have a div that behaves like a table, right? Maybe something like a class that is table, right? And then maybe a div here that behaves like a row. You want to style it so that it behaves like a row. And you can have maybe multiple rows, but each row might have multiple columns, right? Multiple columns. So something like that. And then each table can have maybe multiple rows. See that? Multiple rows. Everybody okay? All right, so let's try it. Let's try this, okay? So what do you style here? What do you style? So let's see, if we go row, if we go to the index.css, we could declare dot row. We have dot row, and we have dot column, right? What do we put in the column? So for instance, what happens, what is the default here, right? The default is that this is, this is row 1, right? And this is column, well, actually, no, let's do row 1, column 1, right? And this would be, row 1, column 2, row 1, column 3, yes? And so this one would be what? Oops. This would be row 2, column 1, right? And this would be row 2, column 2, and this would be row 2, column 3. Okay. Now, if we render this, let's see what it looks like. It just right now it just behaves like normal divs, right? Like normal divs, right? Like it's just one div containing a whole bunch of divs, and they all behave like blocks, right? Just one after another. So maybe let's put some colors here, just so that we can follow along. Where are we getting these colors? So these styles. Do we have colors here? Do we have colors? We don't. Where do we define all our colors? Where do we define them? Was it here in these colors here? Where did we define our useful colors? Did we define it here in the canvas? BG yellow, no. In A3. Oh, I know. We define it in this high level styles.css. No, there we are. There we are. Yeah. So let's load this very useful styles.sheet in our canvas. Okay. So let's load that. So we have that style sheet for within the canvas, but then also we're going to load another styles, but declared even higher level. Right. So we're going to go up one and styles. Right, which is this one that declares a whole bunch of colors, right? So yeah, so let's in our canvas, let's put some colors here so that we know which row is which. So let's put this one, we'll call it BG yellow. We'll call this BG blue, right? And this is BG red. Okay. So it's those three here. All right. Okay. Okay, so let's play around with this column. What we're going to say is that the column, I'm just going to float them. Why not? I'm going to float them. I'm going to say float left. Let's see what that does. So nothing happens. Nothing happens. And the reason nothing happened is that the width of all these divs is so wide that even if I float them, right, they're so big that they don't allow any one of them to kind of like wrap around it. You know, it's as if I were in the starship image, and the image was so big that it's just pushing all of them to the side, right? So what we could do is that these are three columns, so I can make them, I don't know, a width of actually no, we already have width, right? We already have width. So we could say that each one of these is of width 100 pixels. So width, where is this declared? In index.css. And oh, I guess we have to load that. All right, so let's load it. So link relative style sheet, and then href. I think it's in the labs, and then A3, and then index.css. Okay, now I can say that this is with maybe 200 pixels. Let's refresh. Okay, there it is. So look at that. Look at that, right? So this now became 200 pixels. 200 pixels, and allowed the other rows to just flow around. See that? So now, because this one is a flow left, the default behavior is that everything that follows still is now going to behave as flow left, right? Until we break the behavior. Until we break the behavior. Where do we want to break the behavior? We want to break the behavior here, right? Because we want these, each one of these rows to be independent and be in separate rows, right? In separate rows. So what we could do in the row, right? In the row, we can say that I want to stop that flow. I want to clear and stop floating, right? So there is a command that is called clear. Clear. And we can clear left, right, or both. We can say, clear all float, stop floating. I don't float anymore, right? So if I refresh, notice that now just that row inside of the row, I am floating and things are behaving like floats, but then I stop floating, right? And then because these are again in a column, right? The columns are floating. So within there, we're floating. So within the row, we're floating, but then outside of the row, we're not floating. Okay, so and each row has its own elements that float inside of that row. Make sense? Right? Now the width notice that I'm giving width to the first one. I could give width to each one individually, right? And make them all the same size. Right, so now they're all 200 pixels, 200, 200, right? Or I could make these make them responsive, right? And so, for instance, if I know that there's going to be 3 rows, the common thing would be that just like we made the table here take up the entire width of the screen. We did that because it looks better, right? Tables that spread out across the entire width look prettier than when they're scrunched up. Okay, so ideally these would behave the same way, right? And so, for instance, if I know there's 3 columns and I want them to all to be the same size, we might say that the width should be, say, 100% divided by 3. That's 33%. Right? I can make them all 33%. Right? So for instance, in my percentage here, I might declare width, right, 33%, which is, I would say, width 33%, something like that, right? So that in here, instead of making them 200 pixels, I could say that the width is 33%, right? And then make these all equal 33%, right? Like that. So now they're all nicely spread across. Okay, and I could do the same things with the ones below, right? I could say that these are all 33%, column like that. So these are now I'm starting to see rows and columns and whatnot. Make sense? Everybody good? Everybody still follow me? All right. So we could take this even further. We could, there's a lot of ideas of how we could do this, right? So one particular idea that became very, very popular in the print industry, right, in like magazines and newspapers and whatever, right, is that there are very common sizes of splitting a long horizontal content. So one of the ideas was that you could break out logically, you could break out the entire width of a magazine or a newspaper into 12 equal virtual columns, right? If you had a very wide screen, then maybe each column would be 1/12 the width of the entire newspaper, and maybe that would be this wide, because the paper was so wide that 1/12 was still a fair amount of space, and that you could still read from left to right real quickly. Okay? Now in smaller screens, right, maybe on a phone or a tablet, looking at 12 little slivers of columns might be too much. Right? So you might say, well, I only want to see 2 columns. Okay, so in a wide screen you might want to see 12 columns, but in a smaller one you want to see 2 columns, right? So in general, you want to be able to declare these things as a percent, right? So for instance, if you want 2 columns, then that would mean that each column would be 50% of the entire width of the screen, right? Notice that these being in percentage, right? Notice that they are responsive, meaning that as I resize the screen, right, the sizes of the content, right, resize as well, which is what we want, right? We want it to be resizable. And so how can we come up with a kind of like a logical representation of these columns? I give them names, right, and break it out in such a way that they are reusable. So let's take a look at this. So for instance, say I want 2 columns of equal size, right? Of equal size. So one useful thing to say is that I want a column that is 50%, and then I can apply maybe to those 2 columns, 50%. So let's do that. So let's do that. So say we have here column, right, and I'll call it 50%. Right. So that means that this is float left, Yes, it has that feature, but the width is 50%. See that? So that would allow me to do the following, right? That would allow me to do things such as a div with a row, right? And then I might have here content. This is the left content, and I might have the right content, the left and right. Okay, and let's give this color. So class, this would be background red, and this would be class background blue. Okay, so right now they just render like regular rows, and just like divs, like regular divs, right, taking up the whole width. But if I make these to be that this is a column, 50% each, right? Notice that now they're side by side, right? 50%, 50%. So I can expand this, just to become, so that it becomes much more useful, and I can have like a vocabulary of classes, right, that will allow me to lay out things any which way I want. And I could say, column that is 1/3, 2/3. That's a very common way of organizing content. So this is maybe 1/3. That's 33%, right? And then this would be float left, and this would be width 33%, right? And then the remainder, the 2/3, this would be, the remainder would be 66, and so this would be 66, right? Or another useful would be maybe like 20%, right? And then, or 40%, 60%, right? So this would be 40%, and then, so let's copy this. So that's 40% and 60%. So that might be also a useful break of the content, right? So it'd be 60. So for instance, I could do the same thing here, right? Again, left, right. So for instance, I might have the sidebar on the left side. So like a menu on the right, on the left, right? And then the main content on the right, right? Main content. And so this might be 40%, right? And this might be 60%, right? So you have the menu on the left and the main on the right, or if I prefer to have this 33, right? And this would be 66, right? If you want a better split, like a little left, right? And then the other side.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Why like they have the different total lengths?
Oh, because it really should be this really it's 33 plus 66 doesn't add up to 100.
Oh, I see. I see.
So really this would be 67 or something.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, then it adds up, right? So anyway, a very common way of doing this, right? It's called the grid system, where what they do is that they break up the screen in 12 equal parts, right? And then the these column names are now based on how much of a fraction are they from the 12 equal portions, right? So if you have so the name, for instance, column 1, right, would be 1/12, right, whatever that is. So it's left, and 1/12 is what? Can somebody do that? So you can do calc 1/12. Did I do that right? A mismatch, blah, 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 inherent. All right, so whatever that is. How much is 1/12? And 1/12. So it's 0.83, right? So it's 8.3%. So it's 8.333%. Okay. And then you can declare several of these. So this is 2, so that's twice as much, right? So this is would be 16.666, right? And you keep going. So column 3, right, is 3/12. So that's 3 divided by 12. So that's 0.25. So it's 25%. Column 4 would be what, 33%? 4 divided by 12, 33%. So 33.333%. And then would be column 5. It would be 5/12. So it would be 5 divided by 12. Oops, sorry. 5 divided by 12. That's 41.6%. So 41.6%. And actually, let me do. So this is. I'm going to remove that. I'm just going to copy this several times. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So this is 6. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So 12% is 100%, meaning I want to take up the entire screen. 11 is 11/12. That's 91.6%. So it's 91.6666%. 10/12, 10 divided by 12 is 83.333%. So this is 9/12 would be 75%. And 8 is 8/12, which is 66.6666%. And finally, we have 7/12. The 7/12 is 58.3333%. And finally, 6/12 is just 50%, right? Okay. So now I can go back and say, all right, if I want a row, I can say that I want a row here, and I want a menu on the left side, right? So this would be maybe the canvas navigator nav, right? Then we have the course nav. We would have the we would have the main contents, the modules, and then we would have the sidebar, right? The right sidebar. Okay, and then I can split it and say, well, I want this to be, really, really small. So this would be, column 2. Column 2. Maybe this one too. The second one also small, or maybe 3, maybe a little bit bigger. The modules would be maybe take up the half of the screen, right? So that's what, 6. So this whole thing needs to add up to 12 because 12 is 100%, right? So let's see. So this is 6. Let's put this. So this is what, 6, 3. That's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We've got one too many. So maybe we could have this. Maybe this 2 again. Right. And so let's refresh. So there it is. So we have a nav, the canvas nav, the course nav, the modules, and the right sidebar. So the right sidebar maybe could be smaller. So maybe this could be 1. And maybe this could be smaller too. Let's see. And I can give more space to the modules, right? So I can add up here to 8, and the whole thing adds up to 12. See that? Now I can move the contents that I had earlier. Right. Actually, let's move it down here so that let's move this. Let's move these here. This row. Let's move this row. Move it to the bottom so that we can interact better. There we go. Let's now copy this UL. Let's make it collapse it. Let's copy it, and let's move it to the canvas now. There we go. Let's copy the course nav, and let's put it in the course nav here. Right, and the modules. Here are the modules. I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to move over to the modules here. In the right sidebar, I don't have anything. So let's re-render this. There it is. See that? So we have the northeastern, right? So it's this, right? It's that here. We have the course nav here. We have the resources, and we have the sidebar on the right-hand side. See that? So we have the same row with multiple columns, right? Split up in a way that looks like a table, but we're not using tables. So we are basically doing the same thing that tables can do, but without actually misusing tables, right? And just so that we can maybe see this a little better, maybe this would be color yellow, right? This is color blue. This is color red, and color, what else do we have? That's all we have. Yellow again. Color yellow. Oh, okay. Let's see why I have a color yellow twice. Yeah, there we go. So we have, 4 columns, right? And split up like that. So we don't really need the table anymore. So we can blow away the table, right? And stop misusing it as we had so far. So we can throw that away. So this was just us playing around with that. So we can comment that out too. We can comment out all these dummy examples that we were playing around with. Comment that out. Oops. Let's comment that out. So we just have the canvas. Make sense? All right. Yeah, so the assignment does walk you through some of those exercises just for you to practice, right? It play around with just simple floats, right? And just talks about grid systems and be able to lay out content, from left, right, kind of like a left third and then a right 2/3. Also a very common way to break it out is like 2 sidebars and then the main content in the middle. Then the assignment asks you, okay, well, now that you know how float works and how to build things horizontally and vertically, and how to make things maybe float to the right, float to the left, and put things in columns and tables and whatnot, right? Use that to build these, this navigational tabs over here, and style. We also show you how to play around with the rounded corners here of the input field. We also show you how to, notice this magnifying glass. See that? That magnifying glass is actually an image that I moved, right, so that it would show on top of an input field. Okay, and it's showing on top of the input field. It's not really in the input field, but it's showing on the input field. So I had to make space for this content, right? This placeholder. I had to move the placeholder to make space for the magnifying glass to be there, right? So I used like a padding. I use a padding so that the placeholder would move over to make space for the magnifying glass. So play around with it. Also, this is the borders being highlighted here. See that? And there's a padding below. Also notice that if this gets highlighted, notice that there's some spacing in between these two things, right? So there's kind of like a margin between these tabs. Okay. So anyway, so try to make it look like that. So here you have rounded corners. Notice there's a kind of like a border all around, right? Like a light gray background. Okay, notice the text here is bolded, but this one isn't bolded, right? It's kind of like a different gray area, gray text. We don't have fonts right now. You could just use images to render these things. So find an image of a heart, find an image of a retweet. Next week, we'll learn how to use Bootstrap, and Font Awesome has really cool fonts and icons, iconography, but we don't have that yet. So just use plain old images for now, and then next week we'll refactor that to use icons. Okay. All right. So yeah, the last section asks you to play around with rotations and with color, diffusion, and gradients. So another pretty powerful and animation, pretty cool. Another pretty powerful thing that we need to learn is flex and media queries. So media queries, let's talk about media queries. So media queries is a technique, right? It's a set of CSS that allows you to define styles based on the size of your screen, right? Or some parameters on the window that you have, right? So for instance, you could say that if the screen is between 0 and 600 pixels wide, right, apply the following style, right? If the screen is a little wider, right, between 600 and 1200 pixels, then apply some other style, right? So this kind of likes you to create some logic around when a style is being applied. Okay. So for instance, there it is. So notice if the screen is between 0 and 600, it shows the content as being red over yellow. But if it's a little bigger, above 600 and below 1200, it switches the style of the same elements, the same exact elements, the body and whatnot, right? Changes it to be yellow on blue. This one declares it that if it's bigger than 1200, it just removes any styling and just you have the default, black and white. Okay. So yeah. So we're asking you to play around with this. So for instance, let me just demonstrate. So for instance, you could declare here in the lab in the index, right? You could declare these divs. Do I give you the divs? I forget if I give you the divs. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't give you the divs. Well, yeah, I mean we could create this div real quick, right? So we have let's try it out here. This H2. So H2 media queries, right? So we have a div. And let's see, you have apparently you have a div out here. And then you have some text below that. So you have some lorem ipsum. Let me grab some. Oh, I'm sorry. I do give you the I do give you the content here. There we go. Paste that in right there. Yeah. Okay. So there it is. And so let's look at the index.css. And so this works with several exercises. The final product is this here. So let me just copy that, and put it in the index.css. So index.css right here, I'll just put it at the bottom. So what this is saying is that this styling, change the body, the background of the entire document, right, to be yellow if the screen is between 0 and 600. So a really narrow window, right? Make the background yellow, right? And the box, that div, the background, make it red. Okay. If you widen it a little bit, right, and you're between 600 and 1200, as you make the screen a little wider, Okay, change the background to be white on blue, or yellow on blue. Okay, if you reach 1200 and 1800, so really wide screen, right? They make it red and blue. And finally, okay, no, that's the default, I guess. Yeah, that's the default. So let's see what that does, right? Let's see what that does. And that's the, where is it? That's the lab, right? So where is it, the lab? Is this the lab? Yeah. So let's refresh. So there it is. The media query, notice that it's making the, so this is kind of yellow on, actually we have to be in 100%. There we go, 100%. Notice what's happening here, right? As I make this smaller, look what happens, right? So I'm making it smaller, 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 right? And it's going to change. See that? Now it's yellow over blue, and it's smaller and smaller and smaller. It becomes now red on yellow. See that? So it's styling. It's applying those different styles. Either this or this or this. Based on the size of the screen, right? So it's querying the screen size. It says, what size are you, right? So if the size is between 1200 and 800, apply the blue on red, right? Blue, right, on red, and the whole body around is red. If it's a little smaller, between 600 and 1200, right, it's going to be yellow on blue, right? So that's what's happening here. It's going to become yellow on blue. Yeah. And then when it's below that, right, which is between 0 and 600, right, it's going to be what, red on yellow, right? So it's going to go smaller and red on yellow, red on yellow. See that? Okay. Now this is very important because it's going to be used. We're going to use this feature to make our screens responsive, right? And by responsive, we mean that it can be used in all sorts of sizes, of screen sizes, right? From large monitors, down to tablets, and then down to phones, right? And what we want to be able to do is that perhaps in a very wide screen, on a very wide screen, we just like the canvas, right? In a wide screen, we want to show 4 columns. See that? But when as the screen becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, right? We want to be able to say, well, actually, I want to only show 3 columns, right? And then when it's even further down, I just want to use just 1 column. See that? So that's what we want to be able to accomplish, right? So here, the columns would be, the first column is 1%, the next column is 2%, this one is 8%, 80%, right? And this one is maybe 20% or whatever, right? But then, as this becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Then this one disappears. So it's no longer at whatever 10 or 20%, it's 0%. It's gone. Poof, disappeared. And notice what happens to this main column, right? It used to be that it was, say, I don't know, maybe 50%. This kind of like half of the whole screen. But then when it becomes this smaller, now it becomes, from 50%, it goes to maybe 80% of the screen. See that? Right? As it becomes smaller. So as we go down and down and down and down, then it becomes this screen becomes now it's what I don't know, what, maybe 6% of the screen. But then when it reaches this, now it's 100% of the screen. See that? Right. So as the screen becomes smaller and smaller, right? These columns change change sizes, right? And then now they are sensible to different to different sizes. So for instance, in what we would do is that we would do the following: we would determine what sizes we want to support. Okay, we would why is this, hello? Huh? we would determine these sizes, and we would determine the column. We would say that column 1, right? We would define column 1 in this size, and then we would define column 1 in this other size, right? Right. So that depending on the size, it would behave differently. Okay. Yeah. What else? Okay. So Simon, let me look at just my slides, make sure that I didn't skip over anything. Let's see. From here. So these are the CSS slides. Let me just go over these quickly, make sure that I did not skip over things. Let's see. Sashi, we talk about CSS. Remember, the acronym definitely is going to be in the quiz. What does CSS stand for? Make sure you know how to spell it. Cascading Style Sheets or sheet. Style attribute, we talked about that. Style element, we talked about that. The link element, yeah. The basic styling, we did foreground color, background color. Oh, we didn't say bold, italic, and underlines. Yeah, those are actually they're deprecated. I mean, you can still use them, but you should instead use the font CSS properties instead of the B, I, and U. Font style, you can make you could use instead font size and pixels. Yeah, somebody asked about PX and EM. So everything is rendered at some point in terms of pixels on the screen. But you can also provide these units in terms of relative size. So by default, the browser defines the default size of fonts to be, I think it's like 16 pixels. That's the default size of fonts, and so 1M or 1EM refers to the scale of based on that default size of 16 pixels. So when you say 1EM, right, usually refers to, oh, you mean 16 pixels, whatever that is, right? Actually the browser can change that, right, to be instead of 16 pixels to 32 pixels or whatever. Whenever you do a zoom, right, of a screen, zoom in, zoom out, right, you're changing that base font, right, and then the 1M, 2M, 3M is a scale on top of whatever the font is, right? So if you say 1M, it's just no scaling, right? It's saying I want this to be the basic base size of whatever the browser says of 16 pixels. But if you say 2EM, you're saying I want to be twice as big as whatever the browser says the size is, right? So you can say, if you say 1EM, then this would be 16 pixels. If you say 2EM, then it would be 16 times 2 is 32 pixels, right? So there's another thing called REM, and R means relative EM. So the EM all by itself is kind of like the global. It's based on the global size of the font, whereas REM is based on the font of the immediate parent. Whatever the font size of the immediate parent is, I will be relative to whatever my parent says. Okay, so there's two ways of being relative, either from the global size or the immediate parent. Okay. Okay, we talked about foreground color, and we did play around with declaring these styles in our assignment. So just more of that. Background color. We talked about the box model, right, of margin, border, padding. We talked about block versus inline, excuse me. Being able to apply these colors either with the style attribute or classes, where you could either declare the styling in one single line like this, border solid 10 pixels, or splitting it up across multiple lines. We did that, right? Block versus inline, we did that. Padding, right? That you could control either the overall padding, right? Or whether you want control individual size of the padding, left, right, top, bottom. And we play around with borders, colors, the size, whether you want thin or bold or dashed or dotted. We saw the padding all around, rounded corners. Yeah, we didn't cover rounded corners. So rounded corners is pretty cool. You can specify the top left corner, the top right corner, the bottom right corner, or all the corners, right? And just specify that you want a radius, right? What is the distance, right, of how much you want the radius from that corner, right? The bigger the radius, the more circular your corner will be, right? If you make it really, really big, right, you can make like a circle out of this whole thing, right? Or half a circle, or all around a circle. Okay? Size and position, we talked about width, height. We talked about relative position. We talked about absolute position. We talked about fixed. With fixed, it's a pretty cool thing that you could do with fixed. Is that you could put a header at the top, which is very common on tablets and phones, right? That when you're scrolling content, and then the top header stays put, right? It doesn't scroll with the content, right? So that's you could use the fixed position, right? And then put the top 0, so it's stuck at the top, right? And then now you have to be careful, because then the rest of the container, the rest of the content would scroll underneath, right? And by default, because you're removing the header from the normal rendering, right, it would not be pushing down that content, so it would be hidden below the header. So you have to be careful and add an offset, right, to push down the content relative, so you can still see it underneath before you start scrolling. Landscape dimension. So this is more the same what we looked at in the assignment. Absolute, fixed position. Z index. So yeah. So we saw that as things start overlapping over each other, we saw that things are rendered in the order in which they are declared, right? So you have yellow, then the blue on top of the yellow, and the red on top of the blue. That's the default behavior. But you can change that, right? Now that things start to overlap, and now there's an ordering, there's like a depth, there's like a z-axis that goes in and out of the document, right? Normally you would only have 2D, right? We have the horizontal x, right, and the vertical y, right? But now you have a z, because things are starting to overlap with each other, right? And you can change how what ordering from the default behaviors. By default, they all have the same z index, right? So that means that they are you're not favoring any one element to be on top of any other element. So the default is to render them in the order in which they're declared, right? But you can override it and say, well, no, I want to favor certain elements on top of other elements. So if you give it a high z index, they will be rendered on top of elements that have a lower z index. So a z index of 10, well, I think the default is z index 1 or 0, right? So if you make an element z index 10, it'll go and render on top of all the other elements, right? So if they're overlapping, so for instance, normally it would render the red square would render on top of the blue. Yes, because in the order, it would render first the yellow, then the blue, and then the red. Okay, but because we're giving a higher z index to the blue here, right, it gets rendered on top of the red instead of the red on top of the blue. Okay, so z index. Okay, float. Right, we play around with float. That allows you to put things in horizontally in columns or 3 columns, right? And could create grids. that split the content in half, like 50%, right, or a third and 2/3, or into a grid layout, right, which we have sidebars and then the main content in the middle. Rotating content, right? You have a transform property that allows you to rotate things in so many degrees, or radians. You can use radians instead. So here's an example of rotating lists, or rotating individual items, or entire images. Okay, or rotating a table. Gradients, right, allows you to paint things, form colors that interpolate from a beginning and an ending color, right? So here's examples of interpolating from yellow to red, or from yellow to green, from the center out, so it's radial. Okay. And then flex is a really cool way of laying out contents, right? Of creating columns and rows without doing all the float stuff that we just looked at, right? Where flex allows you to automatically declare a container like a row, and then automatically all the divs that are inside, you can tell it to either render vertically or render horizontally, right? So here are 3 divs that can be very quickly be configured to render either way, right? So for instance, by default, right, it renders just vertically, but by saying that you want to display flex, right, automatically it flips to rendering horizontally, right, as based on the size of the content that is inside of the divs, right? Or then you can start configuring, how much you want to spread this out, whether they spread out evenly, right? Right, or do they justify to the right, justify to the left? By default, they justify to the left, but you can center them or justify them to the right hand side at the end, right? And or whether you want to put some space in between, so that they are evenly spaced out, or maybe you want to fill in the content so that at the ends they they're justified to the left hand side or the right hand side, right? Or evenly space them out so that they're even, or you can stretch them to take up the entire height of the content, like this, like using flex spaces 100%. They take up the entire width and height of their container, evenly spaced out across the content. Okay. All right. Let's see. What else? I think that is all I have. Any questions? I know it's been a long day. Anything on the chat? All right, any questions? Yeah, that's all I have for you today. So we have assignment 2 due this weekend. We have our first quiz next Monday, right? And it'll be about HTML. So make sure you go over the acronyms, right? I might ask, what does CSS stand for? What does HTML stand for? What does DOM stand for, right? Document Object Model, HTTP. So any acronym that we've seen so far, right, is game. And make sure that your input fields, your text areas, your drop downs, right, your placeholders, your values, your titles. Okay. What else? And basically the exams are all either multiple choice or fill in the blanks, where I might give you a snippet of code and then ask you right? Fill in the blanks so that the code does something. Okay. So that's all next week. Any questions? All right then. If there are no more questions, then thank you everyone. See you next Monday. The quiz will be in the second half of the lecture after the break. All right.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you everyone. Take care.